This lineup you see on the screen is the top projected one for this weekend's conference championship games on DraftKings. You could definitely play this one in cash, but it's not going to be one you want to play in big tournaments out there because the likelihood of it being duped is going to be heavy based on how this projections work out. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Spags here doing the deal for this weekend's DraftKings NFL slate. It's a two-gamer, so I think a lot of the concepts that we've talked about all season long in Showdown formats are going to be a good thing to look at for this one. So let's start out the way we always do, of course, with the Vegas odds. You can see the lines been moving around a little bit throughout the week. And I'll have my sheet here that does the math for me because Lord knows I don't want to calculate this one out loud. But Philadelphia, 2.5-point favorite at home in this one. The Niners getting 22 implied points. The Eagles, 24.5 implied points. It's going to be the highest mark on this slate. And then also you can see the Kansas City, Cincinnati line, which has moved a little bit throughout the week. Now it's Kansas City -1. Reports yesterday, Patrick Mahomes looking good in practice, moving around on that ankle. So that's probably the result of that here after Cincinnati was favored by a point yesterday. But Cincinnati's implied points right now, 23.3 implied, and the Chiefs could have 24.3 implied. So all important stuff to note there. Of course, I'm going to breeze through all the stuff as best I can because I actually ran the Crunch Advance today. So you're getting the full kind of short form version of this, but live and in real time with me stumbling over my words as we go. You can see the projections here on the screen from Stochastic. Of course, I would always vouch for them as being the best place to go to get a good read on how projections are going to look across an entire industry. We can see here Jalen Hurts going to be the top projected play overall. Joe Burrow not far behind. That's why the two guys there are on the thumbnails. Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow. Both these things are looking like going to be very popular QB plays. And there is some other stuff that's interesting to note with Joe Burrow as well that I'll hit on in a second here. NFL pain drugs are a good play. Mahomes, yes, I'm sure he's having a great time out there with whatever he's popping for himself. Honestly, I think the thing you're supposed to do, though, is take the drugs like later in the week because you don't want to ruin the lack of effectiveness that you could get by taking it earlier in the week. So, but he's out there, he's got the will of a lot of men that I think are a lot weaker than him. So I think there's things with Mahomes that you and I cannot do out there. But Patrick Mahomes is fighting through that ankle injury. And frankly, a thing that a lot of other players this season have also not played through. You can see Jamar Chase here at number 3. I think it's an important one to highlight right away. He's going to come up in pretty much every crunch. And it was to the point where actually before the show, I was going through my batch crunch where I run things at 33% randomness, 66% randomness, and also add some uniques on top of that. And basically on Fantasy Cruncher, every Burrow stack, every lineup overall was forcing Jamar Chase in because of this projection, because of the salary price point for him. I think that does make T. Higgins more interesting play. I think that does make Tyler Boyd a more interesting play for DraftKings. I think get your Jamar Chase on underdog. That would be my approach overall. And it's going to be a good matchup for him. But I do think there's a chance that somebody else here can have an outlier day that chips away just enough at Jamar Chase that it makes him a less of a sure thing that the optimizers are going to treat him as. Same thing for Travis Kelce as well. At tight end, you're actually going to find some other tight end plays coming up. Again, I'm going to show you guys all the top projected lineups on Fantasy Cruncher coming up in a second here. But you see Travis Kelce, this projection, you would think that he would be in every lineup, especially coming off of that big game last week. But he is, in fact, coming up less than guys like Hayden Hurst, coming up less than Dallas Goedert, who does appear in a bunch of lineups, as I'm going to show you guys in a second here. Point being, I think Travis Kelce, I would have thought would be a little bit of an overvalued play. Maybe the casuals still overvalue him a little bit more. But Kelce, I think, with this projection, with this salary, he should be featuring more in an optimizer lineup, and he's not coming up as much as I would think. So that is something that to me makes me feel like Kelce will still be a good play, even though, again, I think if you're hand building, people are going to kind of jam Kelce in there pretty willy-nilly. Christian McCaffrey's projection this week comes down quite a bit. I think with the Vegas total coming down for the Niners, as well as the fact that Philadelphia has defended the run very well in the second half of the season. They lost Jordan Davis for a while there. That made things look bad for the Eagles against the run. After that, basically, they leveled it out as well. In terms of the EPA going against running backs, catching passes as well, Eagles pretty good in that mark too. Negative 0.08 EPA, which is pretty close to average, but still a positive mark for a defense there that's going to have to defend with a lot of catches going Christian McCaffrey's way. Frank Reich hired as Panthers head coach. That is one I did not expect coming. I really thought that there was going to be a Kellen Moore spot, but no business recycles like the NFL. Frank Reich, I think there are other spots that he could have landed too. There were some reports that maybe you'd take an offensive coordinator job, but that doesn't fill me with joy for that offense based on what we saw Reich at the end of that cold stretch. But we'll talk more about that to come up because you guys know I love the coaching stuff. I think that's a very important part of fantasy football that people sometimes sleep on. And boy, I think whoever they're going to get a QB in this draft class, I feel like that kind of takes Anthony Richardson off the table for them too, where I don't know that I would trust Frank Reich to build an offense around a running QB, but that's neither here nor there. Back to the slate coming up this weekend here. Appreciate Justin giving me the fresh news here that I wasn't even seeing on Twitter yet. We got Joe Mixon. I think he's a solid running back play here. Going to be a pivot again to Christian McCaffrey, much like he was last week. That's an important one to note. And let's look at the value guys too, just so you guys can see the optimizer plays that'll come up a little bit more. Burrow, Hurts, Dallas Goedert. We talked about that already. Brock Purdy, not a bad rate here. He doesn't come up a ton in an optimizer because all the QBs have a higher raw points projection. So that's something with Purdy that I think makes him kind of an interesting tournament play. The one worry I have, which I talked about a little bit when doing the Battle Royale drafts yesterday on Underdog, is Brock Purdy just going to regress maybe to what he probably should have been this entire season? Like, he's obviously played above his head. That's my one concern with Purdy. That said, you see him not coming up a bunch of an optimizer. He's at a different salary tier than the other QBs. On Underdog, you can get him at the end of the draft and basically use that as your way to get completely different as well. Those are all good things for Brock Purdy. But in this particular build, I kind of feel like it's a coin toss. Like, are we going to see the worst of Brock Purdy? Or are we going to see him be good for one more round? You guys tell me, because I think I could certainly be talked into either side of that one. Hayden Hurst comes up in a lot in an optimizer as well with the value play there. And worth pointing out, the Bengals D, I think, is going to come up quite a bit in an optimizer too. The value they represent here, $2,300 salary allows you to jam a lot of stuff in. So I think as a result, going to the Chiefs defense would be an interesting way to get leverage on the field. Obviously, if both defenses are playing well, it's not the most likely in this game, but maybe there's a chance the Chiefs get a touchdown, the Bengals don't. And that could be the kind of thing that pushes you ahead in tournaments. Again, the ownership here from Stochastic, and I'll give them the plug again. Also, check out their lineup generator tool. Apparently, people doing very well with that on social media. And I don't have a promo code or anything in Stochastic. They're always running deals over there, but I do try to encourage you guys to take advantage of the best tools out there. And I would say what they're doing over there, trying to make DFS simpler and make it also, more accessible to more people. I think that's a positive thing. But you can see their ownership they have here. A ton of Dallas Goedert, a ton of Travis Kelce. Purdy point here by Dustin is also a good one that we'll see here when we look at the ownership. Because you check out the ownership of Brock Purdy, he is under 16% projected ownership here. You can get a lot of studs in, and then you just need Brock Purdy to do more like what he did in the wild card than what he did in the second round there, the divisional round of the playoffs. So that's something for Purdy that I think is certainly top of mind. It's going to be a tough matchup, one of the toughest ones he's had this year, playing this Eagles defense that's been good across the board. But I do think if you're going to take a flyer on anybody, just Purdy allows you different constructions that allow you to try to capture the upside from other positions there. And I think if it ends up being a slate where you have a bunch of QBs between 18 and 25 fantasy points, you really just need Brock Purdy to get to that 18 mark. And that's very not unreasonable here based on the projection. Cheap Purdy and 4,400 Ayuk. Yep, I agree. You might see that in the lineups I crunched before the show. So the one thing I want to note here, we've talked a lot about Joe Burrow so far, talked about how he's well projected, also projects as one of the best values on the slate. I think actually technically the best value, a little bit ahead of Jalen Hurts. But Joe Burrow, you can see here projected for 32% ownership. My thought is that's going to be light because of what we're going to see on DraftKings coming up here. So you see all these QBs, and we talk about this a good amount on DraftKings, where sometimes the ownership projections, the ETRs of the world, the stochastics of the world, it is hard to sort of figure out how a casual player is going to approach this. One thing you can always do is open up your DraftKings app and see on the screen right here, Patrick Mahomes going against the 5th ranked defense according to DVP. Jalen Hurts, 7th ranked. Joe Burrow, 28th. Brock Purdy, 3rd. So you're seeing 3 teams here that are in the top 7, according to what casual players are going to see. And you're seeing one that's there in bright flashing green lights, a guy that they know just went off last week. Guy who's got all the memes about him, got all the TikTok videos going about him. Joe Burrow, to me, is going to be, I think, very chalky this week. And then something, too, where he's not coming up at an optimizer as much as Jalen Hurts. He's still coming up a good amount because, again, he's a good value. But that said, when you combine a good value and an optimizer, plus people trying to get contrarian, thinking that it is contrarian to go to Burrow instead of Jalen Hurts, then you add in the fact that the casuals are just going to lock in Joe Burrow. That's where you run into a steamroller of ownership. Can he get there? Absolutely. Again, it's a game where he should be able to throw in the Chiefs. He's going to have to throw because the Chiefs are going to score points however they do it. But I do think Joe Burrow ends up being a little bit overvalued because of that fact. And that's kind of thing that the ownership projections, I think, can't capture. But we've seen it time and time again on these slates, and it's one I'm going to point it out here for you guys right now. Well, let's get into the actual lineups here. If you guys have any chats, drop them in. I'm also going to take a sip of water because I feel like I've gone full guy working an auction kind of mode right now. But here you can see the top optimal lineups here. And again, this is a crunch where we're just running pure projections. We're not running any sort of randomness on it, not running a grouping or anything like that. Basically, for these lineups, you're going to see a ton of Jamar Chase here. Nobody 100%. So that is something also to keep in mind, too, that one thing I've talked about, including last week, where I said, for me in these crunches, Josh Allen and Christian McCaffrey are coming up in every lineup. So maybe you make a crunch then that separates those two guys and tries to go a different way. That ended up being the way to win that slate. I mean, I think you could have maybe found a way to get away from McCaffrey, too, if you got really creative. But point being, just not having one of Josh Allen or McCaffrey was a way to get there. This slate, there isn't anything that obvious. You're obviously seeing a good amount of ownership going to Jamar Chase, good amount going to Joe Mixon here, good amount going to Dallas Goedert. All those guys over 80%, Jamar Chase over 90%. But there's nothing really structurally there that jumps out in terms of just, here's how you get different on a pure player level. Where you can get different, though, is when you go to this team stacks tab. And you could see in this build, 14 out of the 25 crunches here have at least 5 or more Bengals in it. And then you add in this 8 more here. So we're now talking 22 out of 25 have at least 4 Bengals in it. That right away tells me what it said last week, where the optimization was saying play a lot of Bills. My thought was, hey, play some less Bills, go some different configurations. I think that's how it's going to be this week, where everybody's going to play a lot of Bengals. What you want to try to do is capture the production from 1 or 2 Bengals. I think is going to be the way to do that, because if you play, let's say, 3 Bengals, you're now talking 2 out of 25. If you play 2 Bengals, you're talking 0 out of 25, these top projected lineups. So you're just getting away from that obvious thing. And the obvious thing is going to be playing a lot of Bengals. These guys are priced well, but I think you can go with some other configurations, some other onslaughts, whatever you want to do. The point being, I think if you try to play 3 or less Bengals, ideally 2 or less, you're going to be different from a large portion of the field. They're just going to be jamming these guys in because they think they're going to put up a ton of points against Kansas City. Other combos, nothing too crazy here. I guess the only other thing to note is that there is probably a little bit of value in taking these overstacked Kansas City and Eagles teams. It's nothing that surprising there, but you do see them coming up a little bit, not as much as the Bengals. So that's the way that I like to build, is figure out how everybody else is going to be trying to build their lineups, figure out what an optimizer is going to spit out for them. And then you try to figure out, okay, what else is the optimizer saying is a good play? So you're not playing thin things. You're still playing things that are in a range of believable outcomes. And that's an important part for me. You look at the batch crunch here with all the randomness and that stuff on, you could see I split up the QB projections here, or the exposures. So it was a max of 33%. As a result, we get more Brock Purdy, more Mahomes in. I think it's interesting to note that there's less Mahomes that comes up, even with the randomness, even with the stacking rules I have on, where giving bonuses to the receivers, giving bonuses to the running backs, giving bonuses as well to opposing pass catchers. Basically, Mahomes comes up less than Purdy, which I think tells you all you need to know. If you're willing to buy in on the health of Mahomes, if you're willing to buy in on a guy who's been a historically great quarterback, you're going to be doing it in less ownership than you would be otherwise. And you combine that with what we just saw. Again, look at Mahomes in this matchup. 5th DVP. Casuals won't put Mahomes in as much as they should, because they're going to know that ankle thing. They're going to know that DVP thing. Those are going to be the 2 things that make them go, yeah, let me try Burrow. Let me try Jalen Hurts. Let me go whatever other direction. Maybe let me try Brock Purdy. Obviously, you can make a case for all 4 QBs on any given slate. There's a 2-gamer. Like, you got to play somebody there, and you got to try to target a quarterback who create value for his receivers. So you are cutting down on that parlay of what you have to get correct in any given lineup. But that said, I do think when you look at these numbers, you look at all this, I would load up on Mahomes and just try to win with the best QB in the league. Like, I think that seems like a smart thing to me. It's going to be a tough matchup. We saw what they did to Buffalo, but Buffalo also kind of had some letdown spots recently. Kansas City, I know, has had some throughout the year. They let the Texans stay in games. That one jumps out to mind. Denver stayed in some games, but the Chiefs are still a team that offensively, I think, is going to be able to figure out the Bills. So when you see this lower ownership on Mahomes, that one does jump out to me. That said, let's pull some lineups out that I did look at in advance that I thought kind of captured angles that I feel like look pretty good for this slate. And obviously, use these as thought starters. You can play the exact lineups if you want. I tried to get some ones that I think will be lower owned. But overall, try to use this to kind of make your own lineups with the guys that you think are going to be the best plays. This first one up, do I favor Onslaught? That's interesting. I wouldn't say favoring it, because I still think you do want to get chunks of each team. I think there's certainly enough of a pricing gap for some of these guys where we talked about Ayuk being cheap. Like, there are ways to get cheap on the slate. That said, I would like to be able to get Kelsey and Goddard at tight end, because I think Hayden Hurst comes up a little too easily. That's something actually I should probably highlight in the optimals too. Hayden Hurst coming up 44% of the time. Dallas Goedert, 84%. You'll note no George Kittle here. So I think you don't have to do an onslaught to get unique. It's more about just trying to capture these guys who are going to have the same upside. I think that's what I always try to do for these slates. And if you happen to get an onslaught, that's great, but I wouldn't try to force it that way. Mahomes is going nuclear. Petty Mahomes game incoming. That's interesting. I think that Mahomes certainly going to be benefiting from the medical care that he got throughout the week, as well as not having to travel. Like, those are all positives for Mahomes. But I think, it's really the main thing to me that if you can kind of get a guy who's going to be under-owned just because of circumstances and people being afraid of a high ankle sprain, and you probably should be afraid. He takes one bad hit there. If the Bengals play dirty, even if they don't play dirty and just hit him, like, it could be a bad situation. But you want to target the upside if you want to win one of these tournaments, especially if you're playing a milli maker on DraftKings. So that's where I push towards. This lineup, though, here I'll highlight Brock Purdy. It's a 3-man Niner stack. Purdy at QB, Joe Mixon, Christian McCaffrey, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, Dallas Goedert, Hayden Hurst, Eagles. Again, I worry about Hayden Hurst being that value guy that people jam in a little bit too much. It is a good matchup for Hurst, so it's hard to argue it that much on the year. Kansas City against tight ends, 19th in the league according to DVOA, giving up a negative EPA on the year, but still, that doesn't matter that much relative to the volume that Hayden Hurst gets game to game. The one thing that would jump out to me, though, in this lineup is that I have Jamar Chase in it. I do think Chase is just going to be in all these kind of lineups. So I wouldn't hate if you switch to, let's say, Say we go to Higgins, then what can we get at tight end? No, we still can't quite get up to Travis Kelce, which would be nice. And it's also something I talked about yesterday, but I am prioritizing slot receivers in basically all these games. All these teams, it's weird because it doesn't usually line up this way. All the teams left in the NFL playoffs, their one weakness is against the slot. So keep that in mind. Guys who are running slot routes. Guys also who can get slot routes like Jamar Chase did last week, where he's not normally running out of the slot, but they tried to get him in there just so he could have an opportunity to take advantage where the Bills were weak. That's something to keep in mind here, that's where a lot of these guys are going to get value in these matchups, at least based on the EPA numbers on the year. So let's see what else we can switch to. So maybe if I come down off AJ Brown, I just want to get enough money to get to Kelce, but I'm not quite sure that's going to be possible. Let's go to the Chiefs, save a little money there. Let's just drop this all the way down. Let's go to Zach Pascal. Of course, you come to a DraftKings stream wanting to see people build lineups with Zach Pascal. All right, let's get Kelce in. And let's still keep Goddard, because I do think Goddard's a good play. Niners not great against tight end, and again, the slot weakness as well. And then we can get to Ayuk here. So that's a pretty good team. It's a little stacky with Purdy, maybe a little bit too much Purdy there because he could definitely get there just off McCaffrey. But Brock Purdy with Joe Mixon, McCaffrey, T. Higgins, Ayuk, Samuel, Travis Kelce, Dallas Goedert, Chiefs. I think it looks pretty good. Again, you're getting leverage on high ownership for the Bengals D. That all makes sense to me. And I think Kelce is certainly the safest play. I think he can target Juju. Like I did it yesterday on the Underdog Battle Royale drafts. But I do think for a DraftKings format, it's sort of hard for me to imagine Kelce not getting there. If he's going to be under-owned just because people can't afford to get there salary-wise, I'd like to force my way there. Tyler Boyd seems to be a better cheap option than Hurst if Hurst is in a 2 tight end build. That's interesting. I think that's a fair way to look at it. There will be a lot of 2 tight end builds. I didn't do the exact math on it, but you can kind of go through these optimal lineups here. You see a lot of Dallas Goedert and Hayden Hurst, some Dallas Goedert, Jamar Chase, some Dallas Goedert and Kelce, but there are definitely going to be more 2 tight end builds than there probably should be on just a 2-game slate. Just join the stream, but I think I'm going to end up with 100% CMC again and pray to the gods that he doesn't get hurt. I think that's a good thing to do for McCaffrey based on the projections. The part I worry about, as I talked about a little yesterday, the calf injuries just worry me enough that I think it's probably worth seeing what you can get in some lineups without McCaffrey. But that said, I think he's in all 3 of these lineups I pulled individually because he just projects too well. Like you need that floor. Obviously, he has a ceiling as well. It just does feel like if he's out there, if he's like he is at the end of that last game where they're only putting him out there for 3rd downs, like that feels like a little bit of a risk profile for McCaffrey that maybe the field won't account for it, but I think they're going to be afraid to play him just because of the matchup. So in this one, I think it's pretty interesting too. We got Mahomes at QB, Joe Mixon, McCaffrey, T. Higgins, Kadarius Toney, Brandon Ayuk, Dallas Goedert, Travis Kelce, and the Chiefs. So this one I like because you're getting a Chiefs double here. And as we talked about, Kelsey's going to be in a lot of lineups. Mahomes is not going to be in a lot of lineups. So I think that's something where you're trying to, you're basically cutting down the parlay. You're saying Mahomes is going to have a good day because Kelce is. And you're adding in Kadarius Toney as a value savings who's going to be under-owned. Stochastic, I think, has him at 15-ish, if I'm remembering correctly. No, 11%-ish. So that's where they have Kadarius Toney. And I think, too, if you talk about the slot matchup stuff that we've discussed, like I think it's a nice spot for Toney. You make the same case for Juju. You make the same case for Travis Kelce because all those guys get a good amount of slot routes. But Toney, at least they try to manufacture touches for. Juju, not so much. So I think that's where Toney makes his lineup work. And again, you have T. Higgins getting leverage on Jamar Chase, which I think is an important thing that you should get a good amount of in some lineups just because Chase keeps getting there. It's, at a certain point, Higgins kind of has to ebb back the other way. That's sort of how that offense has gone. Gun to my head, Goddard or Kittle more points. I think gun to my head, it would be Goddard. I think Kittle's going to be into block a little bit more than you'd want to see this week. And Goddard's in a pretty good matchup. The Niners on the year, let me pull it up, the EPA numbers for the Niners. Niners D giving up a 0.19 EPA, which is actually the weakest mark on the slate to tight ends. Obviously, we know that we're going to see a good amount of Goddard running out there. And I think A.J. Brown has complained to the media this week, wants the ball more. So there's a little bit of a squeaky wheel narrative going his way. But I think ultimately that just gets more attention A.J. Brown's way. And Dallas Goedert's going to be open underneath a lot. And Brock Purdy, talked about a lot, like these backup QB guys. They just want to get the ball to nice, safe spots within those hash marks, within range. Don't want to try to force it outside that much. Brock Purdy's kind of been the opposite of that. But against a really tough defense, like I think he's going to find his tight end a little bit more just because you don't want to turn that ball over and then just leave your team completely in the dust. In 2-game slates like this, how to versus my QB player pool, I try to get a little bit of everybody. I will take more of the guys that are coming up overall more just because of the fact that, like, obviously, we looked at the crunch before, but you get a lot of Jalen Hurts, you get a lot of Joe Burrow, you're getting less of Purdy, less of Mahomes. In this particular situation, I'll probably force in more Mahomes. But I think if you're playing agnostically, which is really just that you want your QB to derive value from getting the pass catchers right, you could make a case to just play 25% of every QB and kind of level it out in the hopes that you're getting a little bit less in the field of Hurts, getting a little bit less in the field of Burrow, but you're giving yourself a better shot to capture those outlier pass catchers if, say, Brock Purdy somehow does make two guys viable, or if Mahomes, obviously, much more likely to make two guys viable, they're going to be less owned. Do you think McKinnon gets more run this game if they try to hide Mahomes a little? That is interesting because the opposite of like a mobile QB, as we've talked about a bunch of times, and it's kind of a known thing fantasy-wise, mobile QBs do cut down on dropbacks, mobile QBs cut down on the checkdowns, rather, for a running back, just because of the fact they're moving around more. They don't need to get that 3 yards. They can sort of get it on their own. So if Mahomes can't get those 3 yards on his leg, like, he's going to run at one point early on just to show, like, hey, you got to honor this, that I can run if you give it to me. That said, like, you got to think he's not going to run that much. So I think in that case, maybe it honestly might be more checkdowns for Pacheco than he would get normally, whereas like McKinnon's getting more of design pass plays. I'm not sure, but I think there's room for both of them to get there. It's just the same thing as it is every week for the Chiefs. Like, who's going to matter more? Who's going to actually have the upside? And McKinnon's shown a higher ceiling, but Pacheco still keeps being involved every week enough that I think he can get the same boost. So this last lineup here that we'll talk about, Hurts double here with T. Higgins. So again, the main focus for me, I think, is trying to find ways that the Bengals don't score a bunch of points with just Jamar Chase, because I get Jamar Chase is a great play. I will certainly be playing a lot of Jamar Chase. He is just way too obvious here. Like, even with this randomness crunch, and the optimized crunch, we were seeing, 90%, and this crunch with all the randomness and all that, still 62%. Like, that is a lot of Jamar Chase when you're accounting for just how this all works and other guys' projections and all that. So I think if you're just running the numbers, like, you're going to find it very hard to not play Jamar Chase. So that's why I'm kind of obsessed with T. Higgins on this one. We have Jalen Hurts, Joe Mixon, McCaffrey, Higgins, A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, Dallas Goedert, Hayden Hurst. I do think Hayden Hurst is still like a guy that I'm kind of leery of. Like, I've played him a lot in every format this year. Loved him in best ball, loved him in playoff best ball. Like, he's paid off a lot. That said, I think we're now at the point where people know he's paid off a lot, and he's in a good matchup against Kansas City with a high total. So I think Hayden Hurst gets a little bit overrepresented. So I'm actually curious how this would look. So let's say McCaffrey, and again, me not wishing anything on people, but I think trying to think about the game theory of what you can do on a 2-game slate that's still within the realm of reason. What if Eli Mitchell gets there instead? He's basically been carving a good amount away from McCaffrey. When McCaffrey wasn't out there at the end of that game, only out there for the third downs, it was Eli Mitchell getting first and second down snaps. So let's say McCaffrey's calf is banged up. We're getting leverage here with Mitchell. I think we can consider going to Kelsey, or we can try a different thing. Is A.J. Brown worth it? That's a question I would have to ask. I mean, I think we want the double stack here. So what can we upgrade Hayden Hurst to? You can upgrade Hayden Hurst to not a lot of exciting things, it looks like. Jerick McKinnon. No. Well, there's nobody in this price range, huh? That's interesting. I honestly don't know what downgrading McCaffrey to Eli Mitchell gets you, unless I guess you just went to Jamar Chase here. But I guess that would be the thing, is that people will just go to Jamar Chase in those spots. So let's say we kept Hayden Hurst in, and you can get to Jamar Chase. So that's interesting. So basically, Hurst kind of allows you to get to Chase, is what I'm seeing here. And if you have Eli Mitchell in, obviously that would be a double swap. You can make the case that this is a playable lineup. I would still like to find a way to get to Higgins and then get different somewhere else, because I think Higgins is going to be the most direct way. Like, Jamar Chase doesn't get there. Higgins has an outlier day. That would look good. Point being, though, I think there's a lot of ways to play with this one. My 3 takeaways I try to give on the Showdown videos. I'll do that right now. We'll go think these through real fast. So the first one's going to be what I talked about earlier with the account of Bengals. I think is an important one here. Let me answer this question for Kyle first. How much run will Hardman get if in? People are projecting him pretty highly. Underdog has him projected pretty highly. I think he's at risk of losing a good amount of snaps to Kadarius Toney, and he also has kind of had his role eaten into by Jerick McKinnon. So I think we're probably talking 10 to 20 if he can play. But I think, those could be a very volatile 10 to 20, because we know he gets end zone targets a lot. It's just, to me, like, I feel like his role's kind of been eroded a little bit by these other guys. So maybe he just makes everybody come down a little bit. You should probably downgrade McKinnon slightly, downgrade Toney maybe a little bit more, and then also have Hardman be a guy who could be a pivot in those lineups. I think those guys are they're all kind of eating from the same hand, basically. So my 3 takeaways here. Play less Bengals. Again, a lot of the field will end up on a lot of Bengals if they're using just an optimizer. So keep that in mind. I would say max 3 Bengals if you can. Let's see, what's the max 3? Does that include the defense? So we have a 3-man stack, a 3-man with a defense. You can get to a 4-man with the defense, I guess, but I really think if you just try to limit yourself right away, saying I won't play more than 3 Bengals, you're going to be different from a lot of the field right away. The other one, I think it's just being willing to try different QBs. I would be wary. My second pro tip would be being wary of Joe Burrow's ownership. You're seeing him come up here 36% of the time in the top projected lineups. He was coming up a good amount as well with the randomness crunch too. So Joe Burrow is going to be a guy that comes up. And I think you just can't account for the casual steam. You can't sort of be afraid of actually, you should be deeply afraid really of what Joe Burrow is going to be in that DVP. Like, there's nothing that you and I, as sharp people who are trying to do this, who are trying to take fantasy football seriously, just people log on to an app, they see that green and that's it. So I think that's really where the risk profile is. And that's why, and DX Filer here, like DX Filer is a sharp guy. Play more Bengals. That's what people try to do every single time this happens. Like, it's happened every slate. There's been a 2 or 3 gamer. It goes back to Thanksgiving where I did that ship chasing stream, which loved doing there. And my take was really, it wasn't a player take as much as it was, hey, just don't play as many Bills as everybody else because people are going to try to get cute and jam in 7 Bills. And that's like the thing is that they do is like, oh, these guys project easily, but people will force themselves to only play 4. No, people will play 5. People will play 6. So you're ending up in a really tough situation, a tough needle to thread, and also a really duped one. So I would say make sure to limit your Bengals. That's why I go that way. Reed said Hardman's day-to-day at this point. I'd be surprised if he plays. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, again, I think just being prepared for either outcome, but I think saving him for the Super Bowl seems like an okay move, and maybe they don't play him again, but you got to assume if he's practicing, he's going to play probably for the Super Bowl at the very least. So other things, the last pro tip, I guess, that I would give, again, so the second one would be watch out for Joe Burrow's ownership. I think he gets steamed up quite a bit. Third pro tip would be wary of 2 tight ends. Like, I really am intrigued by going Dallas Goedert and Travis Kelce. That said, you're just seeing so much of these guys, these lineups here being 2 tight ends. You can make the case too, the same thing about the Jamar Chase thing. Obviously that goes hand in hand with the playing too many Bengals, but I would say for pro tip number 3, it'll be a twosie. Watch out 2 tight end builds, like having too many of them, and watch out for having too much Jamar Chase. Cause I think it's really easy to get him in. I think the upside makes sense. The projections make sense, but it's also going to make a lot of sense for people out there. Like, we didn't go to the wide receiver tab over here, but everybody's green, and Jamar Chase is the top name, and he's also green, and he's an easy way to eat up some salary. So I think T. Higgins might be the most valuable player on the slate. Like, that feels crazy to say because Jamar Chase has really pulled ahead of him target wise. But I think if you want to get different, if you want to win $1 million, I think you play T. Higgins a little bit more than Jamar Chase and hope that you luck out, or, chop it up, play Higgins, play Boyd, play Hurst, whatever. But I think just try to get less Chase because Chase is going to be very easy and very obvious. He's getting steamed for a reason that doesn't matter. Like, that's not the way to play DFS, I don't think, is that like he's getting steamed for a reason, but also the way that you win is like this outcome being incorrect or this outcome, like, what people are perceiving as being binary. You want to try to, benefit from the fact that football's a volatile sport. So in any given 1 game sample, like, yeah, Jamar Chase is going to go in looking better than T. Higgins, going to go in looking better than all these guys. The way you win the money, though, is by not going that exact same way. That's very obvious. Everybody else is playing. Like, again, Chase, 27th, like Joe Burrow, 28th. DraftKings is basically spelling out how a lot of people are just going to try to build, and you just don't want to be with all those people. Like, it's easier to beat people that are on a different configuration. That's how I feel about it for the day. Either way, you guys know the deal by now. Follow me at Chris Spags. Follow this show at Splash Play Pod. Here on Splash Play, doing the best to give you at least 4 days a week of content as you figure out the schedule moving on. But generally, 5 days a week of fantasy football content. Doesn't matter what day of the week it is. Once we hit basketball season, I'll be on here daily, grinding those out. Of course, Pete coming back tomorrow for the Friday show, and we'll be covering all the ride or die pick stuff. The same things we always do here. Probably hit a battle royale as well. But make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, leave a comment down below if you're watching after the fact. And I appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out with me today. Even if you disagree with my takes, hey, fade them. Have a good time with it. I think that's the fun of this all. I'll try to give you guys my best foot forward, and ultimately you got to decide for yourself. But if I don't win that big money this weekend, I hope you guys do. So I wish you guys the best of luck, and see you guys tomorrow. Bye.